Welcome to the Steve Barkley Ponders Out Loud podcast. As instructional coaches and school leaders, you are tasked with guiding continuous teacher growth to create student success. This podcast looks to support you with strategies from experienced guests, as well as my own insights that I've gathered over the years. I'm thrilled to have you with us. Thanks for tuning in. Coachee-driven coaching. I was invited by Shane Leaning and Jim Thompson from Coaching Done Well to join their podcast along with a longtime coaching legend, Bill Summers. This was a returning opportunity for Bill and me as we had been co-guests a year ago. The questions that Jim and Shane posed to us, fortunately in advance, generated some reflection on my part that I thought I'd pass along here. To start, Jim posed a question that he credited to Michael Bungay-Stayner concerning ideas and ideals around coaching done well.
Steve, I know you're the farthest away, so I'll just repeat the question for you. Steve, from your depth and breadth of experience as a coach, what do you now believe to be true about the idea and ideal of coaching done well?
Yeah, I think I'm going to start off with a really simple response, and that is when coaching is done well, it's driven by the coachee. So if I were to look back very early in my work, I was focusing on what I was calling the teacher's agenda. So the job of the coach, starting out for sure in a pre-conference structure, was to identify the teacher's agenda. And I would paint the picture for that of, as I'm observing in the teacher's classroom, I want to watch through the teacher's eyes before I watch through my eyes. I describe in my coaching conferencing, I want to avoid telling the teacher anything I'm thinking until I'm getting a clear picture of what the teacher's thinking. So that agenda piece has always been there for me. In the more recent years, I've really gotten deeper into the concept that it's reflection that is what causes the teacher's growth. So in order to get the teacher to do the reflection, I've got to be working from that teacher's agenda. And so the teacher's thinking and the teacher's reflection is what drives me. So, to label it that if I'm sharing knowledge with the teacher from my coaching, the teacher has informed me that they want that knowledge. If I'm modeling a lesson for the teacher, it's because the teacher has requested that modeling. The idea of modeling, it arose out of the conversation, wasn't something the coach put in. And I extend that another step, that when I talk about modeling something for a teacher, I describe that the first time the coach models it, they should actually have the teacher only observe the kids and not the coach. And then in the conversation afterwards, the question to the teacher is, did you see what the kids did? And if the teacher can label it, then my next question is, do you want to do that? Do you want to get kids to do that? Now, if you want to get kids to do that, then I'll come back and model again. And this time you can watch me to make the connection. But if you aren't interested in getting kids to do that, I don't have a need to push this any further. So my task is uncovering the teacher's thinking, the teacher's wondering, the teacher's purpose, the teacher's goal. And since you started it with Michael Bungay-Stayner, I'll wrap it back up because I just stole a recent piece from him. And he made this statement in a podcast: coaches need to care enough not to care. And I thought that was really powerful, because what he meant by, you need to care enough about the coachee to not care about what you're thinking is the most important thing that they do. And I think that's the ideal in coaching, is it's being driven by the coachee.
So if coaching is driven by a coachee's thinking, the next question becomes, What does that mean for how coaches respond in the moment? Later in the podcast, I was asked about feedback, feed forward, and a continuum between telling and thinking, along with how does a coach decide what response best supports growth. I shared my idea of a continuum ranging from open-ended question to explicit guidance as a framework for planning a coaching approach. Coaches knowing when to question and step back so that reflection can work, and when to scaffold with co-creation, and when to provide specific guidance is all part of the artistry of coaching.
Steve, the question for you is, you recently did a wonderful piece, From Telling to Thinking, a feedback continuum for students and teachers. And you talked about this. You said you take a look at explicit feedback, open feedback, mentoring responses, and coaching responses. And the idea of Dan Myers to be less helpful when designing learning experiences. These, to me, all point to the artistry of coaching. Steve, could you share with our audience a little bit more about these ideas and ideals and how they play out to advance coaching done well?
Yeah, I'll kick it off with a quote from Tom Schimmer. I've had a couple of chances to have him on my blog. Tom wrote the Agile Classroom, and he had a statement that the purpose of feedback is not to tell students what they did wrong, but to move their learning forward. So he was talking about teachers responding to students in the classroom. So now if I bring that into coaching with teachers, I'd say moving forward is the key. And I frequently talk about replacing feedback with feed forward. I would describe the folks, the reason you went into classrooms to evaluate a teacher was to give the teacher feedback. Your conversation is about what happened. When you switch to coaching, your purpose of being in a classroom is to give feed forward. The only reason we're here today is because we're interested in tomorrow. What happened today really doesn't have much to do other than how it plays into tomorrow. So I wrote that blog because I'm working with a particular school, a year-long project looking at feedback. And one of the items we were exploring was explicit feedback, where you're giving very specific knowledge and information to the person. And sometimes looking at students, sometimes students need that very specific piece of information. But getting students to think is where we're eventually headed with our feedback. So if all my feedback did was get you to correct what you had wrong, we really didn't grow from it. But getting you to think is the critical part. So if you think about a continuum, on one end of the continuum, you have open, and on the opposite end of the continuum, you have explicit. It's not about picking one or the other. It's where does the student need you to be? And if you were to, again, think of that continuum, consider in the middle, you have scaffolding. So sometimes I'm telling you, sometimes I'm scaffolding you to get there, and sometimes I'm just asking you the question that causes you to explore it yourself. So now if I took that and I went into the most instructional coaches, on one end of the continuum, they have coaching. That's when they're most open-ended and generating the teacher's thinking. Some folks may put cognitive coaching into that spot on the continuum. If I go all the way to the other end of the continuum, in the most explicit, it's supervisory. And then I might stick in the middle of it, it's mentoring. So now my job is to figure out where is the person on here. Just today, I was coaching a coach, and she described that she has a teacher new to their school, second year there, and she hasn't been using the department's rubric in grading students, and it's caused a backlash. So she's asking me, do we go in and put her on a plan for next year, an improvement plan? And I said, you may get there, but I'll tell you how I would start. I want to know the thinking that went into not using the rubric that the department has. That's my opening question. And she got really excited when she heard that from me. She said, man, that's a great idea. Because if she gave you reasons that you can't accept for why she didn't use the rubric, that's a good place to jump in. Now, if she came back and said, well, I didn't know we had to use the rubric. And my response would be, well, so if you knew we had to use the rubric, you'd have used it. Well, yeah, okay, now I can jump in and help you use it. It's figuring out where a person would fall all along that continuum. So I think that work of giving just the right amount that causes the person to go on and grow. Telling her right up front that she's wrong just makes it more difficult for you to get the teacher to dig in. And when I took that piece from Dan Myers, he was talking about math teachers and scaffolding. And I had for a long time thought I was in classrooms where over scaffolding was more of a problem than under scaffolding. There were a couple of kids who needed the scaffolding and they weren't getting that. That's a serious problem. But kids who were having to go through the scaffold and were missing the opportunity to struggle and figure it out on their own, they were missing out. So Dan's advice was, if you're going to err on the side of not enough scaffold, because you can always add it. But once you stick the scaffold in, it's hard to go back and take it away. So that's where I am with my coaching. If you think about my continuum, I'm going to start on that open end, and then I'll move to scaffolding, or I'll move to being more explicit the degree to which I find I need it.
Having the chance to listen back on my responses, I hear a common thread. Coaching done well begins with the coachee's thinking, driving the work, and then continues with the coach intentionally choosing responses that move that thinking forward. That's what makes the continuum from telling to thinking so important. It reminds us that coaching isn't about selecting the right strategy. It's about selecting a response that best supports the coachee's reflection and growth at the moment. For me, that's what coachee-driven coaching looks like. Starting with the other person's agenda, listening for their thinking, and then providing just enough support to encourage a next step forward. You can find the link to the whole podcast with Bill, Shane, and Jim in this podcast lead-in. Thanks for listening, and consider sharing your thoughts or questions with me at barclaypd.com. Thanks for listening, folks. I'd love to hear what you're pondering. You can find me on Twitter or LinkedIn at Steve Barclay, or send me your questions and find my videos and blogs at barclaypd.com.